On the 11th of February 1883, Magistrate Christopher Hobson stepped out before a rowdy mob. He stood between these hundreds of disgruntled rioters and a barrack of agitated police officers. Even though he knew that he stood solely as a medium between certain confrontation, he showed no fear. Despite being the lone captain in the ocean of conflict, he didn't abandon ship. Even though he was the only sail in the wind of conflict, he didn't change his course. That is... But let's rewind a bit. In the 1780s, there was a major exodus of French West Indian immigrants from Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Dominica to Trinidad due to the cedula of population. These French and mulatto immigrants liked to party, but their parties were sophisticated. Just before the Lenten season began, they held extravagant masquerade balls known as the Farewell to the Flesh. These parties allowed the attendees to indulge in worldly pleasures. I mean, party hard and have absolution of your transgressions, and just in time for Ash Wednesday. And things were going great for the French settlers, parties, slavery.
And my two best friends, Bordeaux and Burgundy.
The upper class didn't want freed African slaves joining their balls, and they were shunned by the bourgeoisie. So they started their own party called Canboulay. While Canboulay heavily mimicked the French masquerade balls, they integrated some of their own cultural elements, such as drums, singing, dancing, and chanting, as well as symbols of resistance and emancipation. Through Canboulay, the concept of the Calypso was born, as spectators gathered at Calypso tents to listen to the lead singer or chantwell who expressed their emotions through song. Despite the British having contempt for the festival, it continued without much conflict until 1868. You see, a major part of Canboulay were the use of sticks and torches. They were symbols of defiance and rebellion. The revelers carried them to commemorate the burning of the sugarcane fields that marked the end of slavery. But the British just saw a mob with sticks and torches and grew weary of rebellion, so they got banned, though enforcement was inconsistent in the subsequent years. As the festival grew, African drumming, dancing, and stick fighting became major parts of the celebration. And while it was a party for some, others, specifically the British colonizers, hated Canboulay and deemed it a disturbance to the peace. In 1881, the governor at the time, Governor Sir Sanford Freeling, vacated his position due to illness, and Governor Frederick Napier Broome temporarily replaced him for a few months. Broome began his campaign to prohibit Canboulay, which began with a ban on drumming during the festival, citing it as a public nuisance. And he had his personal lackey, Captain Arthur Baker, who shared his contempt for Canboulay to enforce his agenda. This oppressive measure was met with fierce resistance from the Afro-Trinidadian population, and Trinidad was on the verge of civil war. But luckily, Governor Sir Sanford Freeling returned to Trinidad, resumed his position, and confined the police to their barracks to ease tensions. Subsequently, when Freeling left office in 1883, Baker intensified efforts to suppress Canboulay, especially in San Fernando and Princestown. On that morning of Canboulay of 1883, a huge crowd of partygoers gathered, drums in hand, only to be met by a massive police presence, here to enforce the ban on drums. As the situation intensified, Magistrate Christopher Hobson recalled his officers to the police station due to the unexpectedly large crowd. But when the mob sensed their weakness, they stormed the police station intent on a fight. Once again, Hobson stepped out to try and quell the conflict, only to be struck by a lobbed boulder. In turn, he ordered his officers to open fire on the crowd. This resulted in the casualty of one young lad and several others badly injured. Hobson, however, recovered from his injuries. Simultaneously, Baker had his hands full in Port of Spain. Wave after wave of masqueraders, armed with sticks, flambeaux and bottles. The attack was unrelenting. Police, fire brigade volunteers and special constables all attempted to maintain order. Witnesses account that while the battles were manageable, in the darkness of night, loud drumming and singing could be heard throughout the capital, instilling a seed of fear and anxiety, especially not knowing who or where they could attack from. In a bit of irony, Captain Arthur Baker was also struck from a boulder, but his blow was fatal, and he succumbed to his injuries a few days later. The casualties after the riots have been disputed, but many average between 50 to 60 known cases and hundreds of injuries. After the riots, the British government realized that any attempt to prohibit Canboulay would lead to civil unrest, and in 1884, a compromise was reached, allowing the resumption of Canboulay celebrations with certain restrictions, such as the banning of stick fighting. The victory, however, was bittersweet, as the colonial authorities maintained a firm grip on power and continued to perpetuate racial and economic disparities.